This is the story of how I caught she fucked her boss in our house while I was waiting for her at the restaurant. Life had a rhythm, steady and predictable. My wife Emily and I had built a life together that was calm, stable, and seemingly unshakable. Our routines were woven tightly, and I took solace in knowing each day would unfold much like the one before it. It wasn't perfection, but it worked for us, or so I thought. When Emily told me about the upcoming company party, it didn't strike me as unusual. She explained, with her characteristic charm, that it was just a corporate event meant to foster team spirit and celebrate the year's achievements. It'll be a chance to unwind, she said. Jason thinks it's important for us to connect outside of work. Jason, her boss. A name I'd heard more and more frequently over the past few months, always accompanied by a casual laugh or a story about how he inspired the team. Sure, I replied, hiding my mild discomfort. It sounds fun. Emily beamed at my approval, but something about her excitement seemed different. Over the next few days, I watched as she prepared for the party with a level of detail I hadn't seen before. She chose a dress, shorter than I would have expected, and carefully picked out lace lingerie, though she assured me it was just for herself. That night, as I sat in the living room, her perfume wafted into the air, filling the house with an unfamiliar intensity. She looked stunning. Her lips painted a bold red, her hair cascading in perfect waves. For a moment, I felt a pang of pride, but beneath it lurked unease, a small voice in the back of my mind whispering that something was off. At the party, my unease only grew. I arrived later than Emily, as she insisted it would be fine to meet her there. The room buzzed with energy, laughter and chatter echoing through the hall. Among the crowd, my eyes searched for her, and when I finally spotted her, my breath caught. She stood with Jason, her head tilted back in laughter, his hand resting just slightly too long on her arm. Their faces were close, too close. Emily's gaze met his with a warmth that didn't feel professional. A joke passed between them, and she leaned into him, her laughter spilling out like a secret. I clenched my fist, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to brush it aside, it rooted deeper with every passing glance. When Emily finally noticed me, her smile widened, and she waved me over. "Michael, you made it," she said, her voice cheerful and light. She pulled me into a quick embrace, the scent of her perfume intoxicating, yet somehow distant. "Jason, this is my husband," she said, her hand resting briefly on my chest. Jason extended his hand with a confident smile, his grip firm. "Ah, the famous Michael. Emily's told me so much about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the knot tightening in my stomach. "Of course," Jason said with a chuckle. "You're a lucky man, Michael. Emily as well. She's one of a kind." I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "She is." The conversation drifted into harmless topics: work, recent projects, the company's future plans, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason's gaze lingered on Emily just a second too long, or that her laughter was a touch too easy when he spoke. My grip on my glass tightened, the cool condensation a stark contrast to the heat building in my chest. As the night wore on, I found myself watching them more than I cared to admit. Every glance they exchanged, every moment of shared laughter, felt like a weight pressing against my chest. I tried to remind myself that Emily had always been friendly and outgoing, that her charm was part of what made her so loved by everyone she met. But something about the way Jason looked at her didn't sit right with me. And when she leaned in to whisper something in his ear, her hand briefly brushing his arm, my unease turned into a quiet, simmering anger. Later that night, as we drove home, I tried to shake off the tension. Emily seemed relaxed, humming along to the radio, her fingers tapping lightly on the dashboard. I debated whether to say something to voice the thoughts that had been gnawing at me all evening. "Did you have a good time?" she asked, breaking the silence. "It was interesting," I replied cautiously. She glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Interesting? What do you mean?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. "You seemed really close with Jason." Emily's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and defensiveness. "Jason? He's my boss, Michael. We were just talking. Don't read into it." "I wasn't reading into anything," I said quickly, though the tension in my voice betrayed me. "It just seemed like you two were comfortable." She sighed, shaking her head. "Michael, it's nothing. He's just a friend. You know I'm a social person." I nodded, forcing myself to let it go. But as the days turned into weeks, the memories of that night lingered, and I began to notice other small changes. Emily started coming home later than usual, her explanations vague and unconvincing. She spent more time on her phone, smiling at messages she claimed were from her coworkers. One evening, as she was getting ready for yet another team-building dinner, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. A message from Jason lit up. the preview showing a winking emoji. My heart sank, and the doubt that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head, but what if it wasn't? The next morning, as Emily left for work, I made a decision. I would find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next few weeks were a slow descent into paranoia. Emily's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle but undeniable. She'd leave for work earlier than necessary, claiming she wanted to get a head start on the day. Her outfits became more polished, more striking, with an edge of allure that felt out of place for the woman I'd spent years building a quiet life with. She laughed off my questions about her new habits, brushing them aside with a kiss or a clever joke. "You're being silly, Michael," she'd say, her tone light but dismissive. "I'm just trying to stay competitive. The corporate world is all about appearances, you know." But appearances weren't the only thing she seemed to be focused on. Her phone, once casually left on counters or couches, now stayed glued to her hand or tucked away in her purse. The faint buzz of notifications became a soundtrack to our evenings, each vibration pulling her attention away from whatever moment we were supposed to be sharing. One evening, curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. Emily had left her phone charging in the kitchen while she went to shower. I knew it was wrong, a violation of trust, but my hands moved almost on their own as I reached for the device. The screen lit up with a message from Jason. "Jason, can't wait for tomorrow, I'll bring the wine." My breath caught, the words searing into my mind. My hand shook as I swiped up, my stomach churning with guilt and dread. The conversation was brief but intimate, peppered with emojis and inside jokes that suggested a familiarity far beyond a professional relationship. Before I could read more, I heard the bathroom door open and I quickly placed the phone back where I'd found it. My heart raced as Emily entered the room, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders, her smile radiant and unassuming. "Everything okay?" she asked, grabbing a towel to dry her hair. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just checking an email." But my mind was anything but okay. The seed of doubt had grown into a forest of suspicion, each message and smile between Emily and Jason adding fuel to the burrier. I decided I needed answers. Waiting and wondering were driving me mad, so I took action. That night, while Emily slept soundly beside me, I downloaded a discreet app onto her phone. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but desperation has a way of erasing moral lines. The app allowed me to mirror her messages and calls onto my own device. It wasn't perfect. Encrypted apps were beyond its reach. But it gave me a window into a world she'd been carefully hiding from me. At first, the messages were innocuous, the kind of casual banter you'd expect between colleagues. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. There were late-night exchanges, playful and suggestive. Mentions of staying late to strategize were laced with winks and comments about how much they enjoyed each other's company. My stomach churned as I read Jason's message from just a week ago. "Jason, last night was amazing. You're incredible." And her reply, "Emily, you make it easy. Can't wait for the next meeting." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. The evidence was there, undeniable and damning. My wife was having an affair. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, the weight of the previous night's discovery pressing down on me. Emily was cheerful, humming to herself as she buttered her toast, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew that doing so without preparation could backfire. Instead, I began to devise a plan. I needed more than text messages to truly understand the extent of her betrayal, and to protect myself when the confrontation inevitably came. That week, I installed cameras in the house, subtle enough to avoid detection but strategically placed to monitor key areas. I also reached out to a private investigator, someone recommended by a friend who had been through a similarly messy situation. It felt surreal, as if I were stepping into the pages of a bad novel, but I knew I had no other choice. Days turned into a blur of surveillance and silent observation. I watched as Emily left the house with a newfound pep in her step, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She'd come home late, her excuses rehearsed but unconvincing. Late night again? I asked one evening as she slipped off her heels. Yeah, she sighed, dropping onto the couch. Jason's been pushing us hard lately. He's really gunning for a promotion, so the whole team's paying the price. I nodded, hiding my frustration behind a sip of whiskey. He seems to rely on you a lot. She shrugged, her smile not reaching her eyes. I guess I've proven myself. It's flattering, honestly. The cracks in her story were glaring, but I played along, biding my time until I had everything I needed. The breaking point came one Tuesday afternoon. The private investigator had followed Emily to a boutique hotel downtown, where she'd booked a room under her maiden name. Jason arrived shortly after, his hand resting casually on her lower back as they entered the building together. The investigator captured photos, time-stamped and irrefutable. My stomach turned as I looked through the images, each one a knife to the heart. There was no room left for doubt. That evening, Emily came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile warm and familiar. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. "It was illuminating," I replied, my voice calm but loaded with meaning. She didn't notice, too busy texting someone as she headed upstairs. I sat there, staring at the photos on my phone, my mind racing with what to do next. The confrontation was inevitable, but how and when were questions I wasn't ready to answer. For the first time in years, I spent the night on the couch, the distance between us a stark reminder of how far we'd drifted apart. The weeks of suspicion and subtle distance between us were unbearable. I'd seen the messages, the photos from the private investigator, and I thought I'd prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found one fateful evening when I reviewed the footage from the cameras I had installed. It was late on a Friday night. Emily had texted earlier, saying she'd be working late on a presentation with Jason. The words had become so predictable, they felt scripted. I played along, replying with a casual, "Good luck, don't work too hard." But my plan wasn't to sit idly by. Around midnight, I opened the app connected to the cameras in the house. Most of the feeds showed nothing but dimly lit empty rooms. I almost closed the app, chalking it up to another routine evening of silence and deceit. But then I saw it. The feed from the living room flickered to life. Emily entered, laughing softly, her arm brushing against Jason's as they stepped through the doorway together. My stomach tightened as I watched them. She was holding a bottle of wine, her smile glowing in the dim light. Jason leaned in close, murmuring something that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. I wanted to stop watching, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Emily placed the wine on the coffee table and turned to face Jason. The way she looked at him, a mixture of warmth and longing, was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Jason leaned in, brushing her hair aside before pressing his lips to hers. It wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was hungry, passionate. My breath hitched as I watched her respond in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white as the scene unfolded. They didn't even bother to take things upstairs. Instead, Emily guided him to the couch, her laughter ringing out like a dagger to my chest. She straddled him, their movements frantic, the air between them charged with the kind of electricity that should have been reserved for us. It was surreal. I was sitting in the dark, watching my wife betray me in the very home we had built together. Each kiss, each touch, each whispered word I couldn't make out felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I wanted to scream, to storm into the living room, and throw Jason out of my house. But I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, the weight of her betrayal pinning me in place. The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She hummed softly as she made coffee, her hair still damp from her shower. "You're up early," she said, flashing me a smile. "Couldn't sleep," I replied flatly. She didn't seem to notice the edge in my voice. Instead, she busied herself with breakfast, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Watching her, so calm and composed, I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. How could she stand there, so poised and unbothered, after what she'd done just hours ago? I spent the day in a haze, replaying the footage in my mind, every glance, every touch, every sound. The images were seared into my brain, a relentless reminder of her betrayal. By the evening, I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer, and it was time to confront her. That night, as Emily sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I joined her. My heart pounded as I pulled out my own phone, opening the footage from the previous night. Without a word, I pressed play and handed it to her. At first, she didn't react, but as the video played, her expression shifted. Her face paled, her fingers trembling as she clutched the phone. She didn't say a word, but the guilt in her eyes spoke volumes. "What is this, Emily?" I asked, my voice low and steady. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Explain this to me!" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to mine, wide and filled with panic. "Michael, You what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "You brought him into our home. You let him touch you here, in the house we built together, on our couch, for God's sake." Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she began to sob. I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered. "It was a mistake, Michael. I swear." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was deliberate, planned." She shook her head, her tears falling faster now. "I was lonely," she choked out. "You've been so distant lately, so consumed with work. Jason made me feel wanted." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as I tried to process what she'd said. "So it's my fault?" I asked, my voice rising. "You're blaming me for your choice to cheat?" "No," she cried, standing to face me. "I'm not blaming you. I didn't know how to fix us, Michael. And he was there." I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger and hurt. "Fix us?" I spat. "You don't fix a marriage by screwing your boss on the couch. You fix it by talking, by working together. But you—" I stopped, shaking my head. "You took the easy way out." Her sobs filled the silence, but I felt no sympathy. I was too consumed by the weight of her betrayal. The image of her and Jason burned into my mind like a brand. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't look at you, Emily. I can't look at this house without seeing—" I stopped, swallowing hard. "I'm leaving." She rushed to me, grabbing my arm. "Michael, please, don't go. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll quit my job. I'll never see him again." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I pulled away, heading for the door. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice cold and final. "You should have thought about that before." That night, I checked into a nearby hotel, the emptiness of the room a stark contrast to the chaos of my emotions. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The life I'd known was gone. The hotel room was cold and lifeless, but it was a sanctuary compared to the house I'd left behind. I spent hours staring at the wall, the events of the past night playing on a loop in my mind. The betrayal was so complete, so invasive, that it felt like I was grieving a death. The death of my marriage, the death of the life Emily and I had built together. Morning came, and with it a heavy decision. I wasn't going to let Emily manipulate her way out of this. I needed to act, not just react. And that meant being deliberate and calculated. I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Andrea I'd met during a networking event years ago. I explained the situation briefly, my voice hollow and mechanical. "You've got proof?" she asked after a pause. "Yes," I said, "on footage, messages, and I can send it all over." "Good," she replied. "We'll start the divorce proceedings immediately. With evidence like this, you'll be protected in court. And if you want to pursue any form of recompense or make sure she walks away with nothing, now's the time to decide." Her words were sharp, but I appreciated her efficiency. "I want her out of the house," I said firmly. "It's my name on the deed, my name on the mortgage. She doesn't deserve to stay." Andrea agreed, and we worked out the next steps. After ending the call, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since I discovered Emily's betrayal, I had control. That evening, I returned home, determined to confront Emily on my terms. I opened the door to find her sitting on the couch, the same couch where I'd watched her and Jason tear apart my trust. Her eyes were swollen and red, a crumpled tissue clutched in her hands. "You're back," she said, her voice a mix of relief and apprehension. "Not for long," I replied, setting my bag down. "We need to talk." She nodded, her hands trembling as she placed the tissue on the table. "Michael, Don't," I interrupted, raising a hand. "Don't start with excuses or apologies. I've heard enough. I'm here to lay out what's going to happen next." Her mouth opened, then closed, her expression pleading. "I don't want to lose you," she said finally. "Please, Michael, I know I made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But we can fix this. I'll do anything. I stared at her, my resolve hardening. You already lost me, Emily. The moment you brought him into our home, the moment you let him touch you here, that was the end. This marriage is over. She began to cry again, her sobs filling the room, but I felt nothing. My sympathy, my love, my patience, they were all gone. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I continued, my tone firm. I'm filing for divorce. You'll be served the papers in a few days. Her head snapped up, her face pale. Divorce? No, Michael, please. We can work through this, counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't do this. I've made up my mind, I said, unmoved by her desperation. You made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, packing up Emily's things and informing close friends and family about the impending divorce. Most were shocked, some were sympathetic, and a few, those who had suspected something was amiss, weren't surprised. Word of the affair spread quickly, especially when I decided to expose Jason. Using the evidence I'd collected, I sent an anonymous email to the HR department of their company, complete with photos and screenshots of messages between Jason and Emily. It wasn't out of spite, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a grim satisfaction. It was about accountability. Jason had abused his position of power, and he needed to face the consequences. Within a week, Jason was suspended, pending an investigation. I later learned that he was fired shortly thereafter, his reputation in shambles. Emily, too, resigned from her job, unable to face the humiliation. The day Emily moved out was surreal. She packed her belongings in silence, her face pale and drawn. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as the movers carried box after box out of the house. When the last box was loaded into the truck, she turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Michael, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I watched as the truck drove away, the weight of her absence both liberating and suffocating. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The house felt emptier without Emily, but it also felt lighter, free of the shadows her betrayal had cast. I cleared out every trace of her clothes, her photos, even the wine glasses she had used with Jason. It was cathartic, each discarded item a step toward reclaiming my space and my life. But the healing process wasn't linear. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the betrayal in vivid detail. There were moments of anger, of grief, of questioning how I had missed the signs. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I realized I was better off without someone who had so blatantly disregarded my trust. One evening, as I was sorting through paperwork for the divorce, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend. Tom, hey, heard about what happened? Let's grab a drink sometime, on me. I hesitated before replying, but eventually typed, sure. Thanks, Tom. That night, sitting at a dimly lit bar with Tom, I felt a flicker of hope. He didn't press for details, didn't offer unsolicited advice. He just listened, sharing a few stories of his own struggles and reminding me that I wasn't alone. You'll get through this, he said, raising his glass. It might not feel like it now, but trust me, you'll come out stronger on the other side. I clinked my glass against his, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. Here's hoping. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. I walked out of the courthouse with a sense of closure, the weight I'd been carrying finally lifting. Emily and I didn't speak again, save for the occasional legal formality. She moved to another city, and I focused on rebuilding my life. I started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't in years. Going to the gym, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd long abandoned. The house, once a painful reminder of betrayal, became a sanctuary. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and made it entirely my own. And slowly I began to heal. One sunny afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a book in hand, I found myself smiling. It wasn't forced or fleeting, it was genuine. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Sometimes destruction is necessary for new growth. And as I looked out at the horizon, I realized that my life, though irrevocably changed, was far from over. It was just beginning.